beautifuls. This is Manna Reads. Welcome to my channel. If this is your first time following, or if this is your first time locating my channel, welcome. What I do here is I read from a novel. Actually read from a dame called Heaven's Official Blessing. And I do read this novel every Thursdays. And on Fridays, I do kind of like book reviews and do other fun things. And on Saturdays, I typically do live streams where I live stream Dream Daddy. It's an autonomy game. But today is the day for some reading. So if you've been following along with us from the beginning, you know that we're on chapter 5, which is Red Clad Ghost. And so we did part 1 last week. And so now we're going to do part 2, and we're going to learn a little bit more about ghosts. We're going to learn a little bit more about mortals, and we might even learn a little bit more about godhood. I don't know. But yeah, we're just going to get going here. Just so you know that if you do want to purchase any of these books, you can do so using my Amazon affiliate link. That would really help out, and I would appreciate that a lot. Okay, so we're just going to keep going from the last where we left off. So, that's right. Mortals worshiped gods to ask for blessings and protection so they could escape from the evils of the ghost realm. And that was how gods came to gain so many followers. Yet Cheng, a ghost, had such a large following on Earth that it could influence the world single-handedly. Here is a story that must be told. When Cheng first appeared, he did something notorious. He openly challenged 35 heavenly officials. The challenge was to spar with the martial gods and to debate with the civil gods. 33 of the 35 thought it was hilarious, but were also infuriated enough to take up his challenge, thinking that they could join forces to teach this little devil a thing or two. The first to step up to the plate were the martial gods. The martial gods were the strongest of the heavenly officials. Each had plenty of believers, and they were all powerful. In the face of a newborn ghost, it was a sure win, yet unexpectedly, it turned out to be a complete annihilation after one battle. Even their weapons were completely smashed to pieces by Cheng's freakish scimitar. It was only after the battle that they found out Cheng was born of Mount Tonglu. Mount Tonglu was a volcano, and within its mountainous domain there was a city called Gu. The city of Gu wasn't a place where people cultivated poison, but rather the city itself was a great venom. Every few hundred years, tens of thousands of ghosts descended upon the city of Gu to butcher one another until, at last, only one remained. And thus was this venom brewed. It usually ended in complete elimination, but those few who were capable enough to make it out alive would emerge as the devil incarnate. Only 2 such ghosts had ever made it out of the city of Gu in the past several centuries, and as expected, those 2 both became well-known ghost kings. Cheng was one. After the defeat of the martial gods, it came for the civil gods to rise to the challenge. Surely Cheng could fight, but not debate. Unfortunately for the civil gods, they could not defeat him. Cheng could recite the classics and debate the contemporaries. He was sometimes polite, sometimes vicious, sometimes unyielding, sometimes incisive, and sometimes quiggling. He was impenetrably sharp, his arguments flawless. He verbally abused the civil gods from top to bottom, past to present, and infuriated them so much they puked blood and washed the skies red. Cheng gained fame overnight. However, that alone wasn't enough to call him scary. What was scary was that after the challenge, Cheng demanded all 33 officials make good on their word. Before the challenge, it was decided that if Cheng were to lose, he would offer up his own ashes. If the officials were to lose, then they must descend from the heavens and return to being mortals. If it weren't for his arrogant attitude and divisive stake, the convictions of the 33 officials that they would not lose, they never would have accepted such a term. However, not a single heavenly official voluntarily honored the terms. It was humiliating to renege on their bet, but when they thought about it, if only one of them was defeated, it'd be an embarrassment. But if all of them were defeated and humiliated, then no one would lose face. They could even turn around and mock the other party. So they all came to a tacit understanding that they'd pretend nothing had happened. Mortals were forgetful anyway. They would forget all about this in 50 years or so. They were not wrong about the mortals, but they were wrong about Hua Chen. The gods refused to fulfill their promise. That was fine. He would give them a hand. Thus, Hua Chen burned every single temple and shrine of all 33 gods. This was the stuff of nightmares for all the gods in the heavens. The red-clad ghosts burning of the 33 martial and civil gods' temples. Temples and followers were the main source of power for heavenly officials. Where would followers go to pray if there were no temples? If they didn't pray, there wouldn't be merits. The massive loss of temples and merits greatly injured the heavens. To rebuild would take at least 100 years, and even then, they wouldn't be the same as before. This was a catastrophe greater than failing and transcending tribulations. The number of temples and shrines these heavenly officials combined was at least in the tens of thousands. But Hua Chen managed to burn them all in a single night. How? No one knew, but he did. It was pure madness. The gods cried foul to the heavenly emperor, but there was nothing he could do. The heavenly officials themselves accepted the challenge and the terms, and Hua Chen was cunning enough only to destroy the temples without harming anyone. It was as if he dug a hole and asked the gods to jump, and the gods themselves dug the hole bigger and dove in. With the way things were, what more could have been done? At first, the 33 heavenly officials had wanted to show the world the defeat of this crazed little devil. So they broadcast the challenge into the dreams of many royals and nobles to display their strength and might before the most devout believers. But all the royals and nobles saw was their miserable defeat. When the mortals woke up, they switched from worshiping heavenly officials to worshiping that ghost. The heavenly officials, who lost both their temples and believers, soon grew weaker and weaker until they were erased from existence. It wasn't until a new wave of ascensions that those empty positions were filled again. Ever since then, the name Hua Chen was feared in the heavens. Even just hearing a mention of red robes or silver butterflies brought a cold sweat to many. Some feared that he would challenge them again and burn their temples if they were ever to incur his displeasure. Some were blackmailed into silence and inaction because he had them by the balls, and some even oddly respected him because of how wide his reach was in the mortal realm. Sometimes they'd even have to ask him for help, paving the way for them while they carried out their duties. This went on for a long time, and many heavenly officials developed a peculiar sort of admiration for him. Thus, the heavens feared, hated, and respected this ghost king. Among the 35 gods who were challenged, the two who declined were General Wang Yan, Mu Ying, and General Nan Yang Fenyin. They thought the challenge was beneath them and didn't care to take it. Turned out that was the right decision to make. But even then, Hua Chen hadn't forgotten about those two. Many Zongyuan festival patrols ended in fists and blood when both parties crossed paths with each other. Those crazy manacles, silver butterflies, left an everlasting impression on both men. Hearing this, Zilan thought that the fluttering silver butterfly that sparkled and danced adorably around him in delight. He couldn't picture it as described in the rumors. Was the little silver butterfly really that scary? Zilan wondered. It wasn't that bad. It was kind of cute. So that's the end of chapter 5, which was a lot shorter. So now I think we can go ahead and read chapter 6, which is clothes redder than maple, skin white as snow. I think something exciting is going to happen. Hopefully, I don't know. We'll have to see. Anyway, so let's just think about chapter 5 for a minute. Like, does Hua-chan sound very frightening? Like, are y'all scared of him? Are you guys anxious to meet him? I know I am anxious to meet him. We've heard about him for like 3-4 chapters, and I'm very curious about him and see what he's about. So we're just gonna chug along here. So, of course, those were the words he would never say aloud. But no wonder Nan Feng and Fu Yao's faces changed when they heard about those silver butterflies. They must have had a hard time at the hands of the silver butterfly's master, together with the 2 generals they served. Your Highness, did Hua Chen do anything to you? An official asked, as if Zilan should be missing an arm or a leg. He didn't really do anything, just... Zilan stopped, at a loss for words. Just what? He couldn't possibly say that Hua Chen just hijacked his sedan, held his hand, and strolled with him in the woods. Stunned for a moment, Zilan finally said, He broke Wang Yi's enchantment array at Mount Yuyan and took me inside. The heavenly officials all grumbled inwardly, but remained in an uneasy silence. After a while, an official finally asked, What do you think of this? From the voice alone, Zilan could imagine how the various officials looked as they shook their heads and shrugged. Who knows? Completely no idea. No one knows what he wants. How scary. What on earth is he thinking? No one could read that Hua Chen. Although Hua Chen had been ambiguously known as the devil incarnate, Zilan didn't think he was that scary. And all things considered, Zilan had Hua Chen to thank for his help in the northern case this time around. Either way, his first mission after Ascension was complete. It was predetermined that all merits from the northern case would be counted under Zilan's name. But that old lord official was so overwhelmed with grief over the death of his daughter that he didn't actually remember to fulfill the promises of his prayers until much later, and the merits were discounted because he did so mournfully. Yet somehow, with a little bit here and a little bit there, and a lot of oversight everywhere, Zilan was finally able to repay most of the 8,180,000 merits. Zilan was at last debt-free. Feeling light with the weight off his shoulders, happy and high-spirited, Zilan decided he'd now focus on being a good god. And it would be great if he could become acquaintances or friends with other heavenly officials. Even though the upper court communication array was generally peaceful, it would turn boisterous once things got busy. Sometimes an official was feeling good or had encountered something interesting. They'd share in the array, and there'd be merriment. Although Zilan didn't recognize most of the voices, he would listen silently, but he couldn't always remain invisible. After a while, he'd randomly join the conversation. That really is quite interesting. I read this pleasant verse in passing and thought I'd share with everyone. Here is an effective little cure for back and leg pains that I share with everyone. Unfortunately, every time he shared these mindfully selected, physically and mentally beneficial tips, the communication array would go silent. Finally, Lin Wen couldn't take it anymore and told him privately, Your Highness, what you're sharing in the communication array is nice, but even those who are hundreds of years older than you wouldn't share those kinds of things. Zilan felt a little depressed. He wasn't even that old, so how did he end up becoming the senior among the heavenly officials, who couldn't keep up with the trending topics of the youngsters? Probably because he'd been away for too long and always lived a solitary life without a care for the outside world. Alas, it couldn't be helped, so whatever, he gave up, and became less depressed. But there was another problem. There were still no new shrines built for him in the mortal realm. Maybe there were, but the heavens hadn't found them, so there weren't any records. Even old lords of the ground and soil had shrines. As a formerly ascended official, one of the three at that, having neither shrine nor temple nor followers was pretty awkward. But as awkward as it was only other heavenly officials feeling awkward for him. Zilan personally thought it wasn't that bad. And one day on a whim, he suddenly thought, if no one worships me, I'll worship myself. None of the heavenly officials knew how to respond to that. Who had ever fucking heard of a god worshiping himself? To reach such tragic heights, what was the point? However, Zilan was used to receiving nothing but awkward silence the moment he spoke, and thought amusing himself could be fun. Once he made up his mind, he jumped back down to the mortal realm. This time, he landed in a small village in the mountains. It was known as Kui, named for the water chestnut. Rather than a village, it was more like a hillside hamlet, with green trees and clear waters. It was a pleasant country landscape, with a continuous stretch of rice paddies. Such a beautiful scenery. Zilan thought he had landed in a really good place this time. When he looked further, he saw there was a small, dilapidated shack on a hill, and upon asking around, the villagers told him, the house is decrepit, there's no owner, and vagrants sleep at night in there every once in a while. You could go make yourself at home. Well, wasn't that just perfect for him? Zilan walked toward the shack. As Zilan walked closer, he realized that the shack looked decrepit from afar, but on closer inspection, it was literally crumbling. 2 of the 4 columns that held up the rectangle-shaped shack were probably rotted through. When the wind blew, the entire shack would shake and creak, possibly ready to collapse at any time. But it was still within Zilan's range of acceptable. He went for a look and began to tidy up the place. The villagers were quite surprised to see that someone actually going to settle in that shack, and all came to check on Zilan out. They gave Zilan a huge warm welcome. Not only did they donate a broom to help with cleaning and watch as he swept until he was covered in dust, they even gave him a basket of freshly picked water chestnuts with their skin peeled off. The water chestnuts were white and crisp, fresh and juicy. Zilan squatted on the doorstep and ate them. He then put his hands together and, feeling thankful for the blessing, he decided to call this place Kui Shrine. Kui Shrine already had a table inside that could be used as the altar. After a couple of wipe downs, Zilan busied himself with cleaning this and that, and the onlooking villagers soon realized that this young man was building a shrine of sorts. Curiosity overtook him, and they questioned him. Which god are you going to worship? Zilan cleared his throat and said, Yes, this shrine will be for the Prince of Zanli. Everyone's face went blank. Who's that? Zilan replied, I don't know either. He's a prince, I think. Oh, what does he do? Probably watches over you and keeps you safe, while collecting scraps and passing. The villagers asked excitedly, Then does this prince oversee the blessing of wealth? It'd already be pretty good if you don't get blessed into debt, Zilan thought to himself and gently replied, I'm afraid not. The crowd started throwing suggestions at him. Why not worship the water master for wealth? It'll bring you good money for the temple. What about Lin Wen Zillion? Then maybe our village will produce a scholar. A girl shyly offered, what about? Zilan maintained his smile. What about General Yu Yang? If Zilan really built a Yu Yang shrine, Fenyan would probably shoot him dead on the spot with an arrow. After roughly tidying his shrine, all that was left that Zilan needed were an incense burner, some fortune shakers, other miscellaneous sundries, but Zilan forgot the most important thing, the statue of a god. He carried his bamboo hat on his back and stepped out the door. Oh yeah, there was no door either. He pondered for a moment. This shack definitely needed to be repaired. And so Zilan wrote and put a sign out front. Please kindly donate to the renovation of this broken shrine for the accumulation of good merits. Zilan left, walked for 3 to 4 kilometers, and entered town. To do what? To get a life, of course. So he went to do what he did best. In fairy tales, gods didn't need to eat, but in truth, it was hard to say. The Almighty could certainly extract and absorb the necessary spiritual energy directly from sunshine and rain dew, but the problem was, it wasn't a matter of ability, but rather, why would you? Some gods, due to their cultivation methods, required clean internal organs and could not touch even a drop of mortal grease. If they were to ingest mortal sustenance, it would be as if they had been struck with food poisoning and they would get diarrhea. Thus, they could only ingest cleanly ground spiritual fruits or magical beasts that had life-prolonging and power-strengthening effects. Zilan didn't have any of those problems. With the cursed collar on, he was no different than a mortal. He could eat anything, and through experience, nothing he ate could kill him either, even if it was a bun that had been set aside for over a month, or a cake that had gone moldy. He could eat it all without harm. With such a body, he could pretty much get by just by collecting scraps. To compare them, building a shrine cost him money, while collecting scraps made him money. So ultimately, truly, collecting scraps was better than ascension. Zilan had the looks and grace of a saint, so he had the upper hand when collecting scraps, and it took him almost no time to collect a giant bag. On the way back, he saw an old ox cart that was piled high with hay. The cart looked like one he'd been seen before in Puke village, though it should be going the same way. He asked for a ride, and that cart driver tilted his chin to signal for him to get on. Carrying his big bundle of junk, Zilan climbed to take a seat. It was only when he settled that he realized there was someone else lying on the other side of the tall stack of hay. This person, whose upper body was hidden behind the hay, had his left leg crossed over his right. It appeared that he was lying there with his arms pillowed behind his head, taking a rest. He looked so carefree and at ease that it made Zilan a little envious. What tight pair of black boots on a pair of long legs was a sight pleasing to the eyes. It reminded Zilan of a different pair that walked with him at Mount Lian. Zilan could not help but sneak several more looks to confirm that there was no silver chains on those boots, which seemed to be made of an animal pelt. This is probably a young master coming out to play, he thought. The cart shook as it drove languidly. Zilan pushed back his bamboo hat and took out a scroll to read. He didn't really care for worldly affairs, but having created too many awkward situations, he figured he'd better do some studying. The cart rattled and time passed. Looking up, they were traversing a maple grove, a sea of flaming red in a field of green. The rustic charm of the mountain countryside, with fresh grass that refreshed the mind. It was extremely intoxicating, but Zilan couldn't not help to be slightly taken aback. A long time ago in his youth, when he cultivated at the Royal Holy Temple, the entire mountain of maple was like this, shimmering like gold, intense like fire. The unforgettable sight before him now inevitably took him down the trip of memory lane. Zilan watched for a long time before looking down at the scroll. The first few lines in the scroll were thus: The Prince of Zenli ascended thrice as a martial god, a misfortune god, a rubbish god. Well, all right, Zilan said out loud. If you think about it, a martial god is no different than a rubbish god. All gods are equal. All beings are equal. A snicker came from behind and a voice said, Is that right? The youth on the other side of the cart lazily continued to drawl. People naturally love saying that all gods are equal and all beings are equal, but if that was true, then pretty much all those different gods wouldn't exist. Zilan looked at the boy, who was still lying there idly without showing any intention of getting up. He had likely interrupted out of boredom. You're probably right, Zilan said and smiled. Zilan returned to his scroll and continued reading. Further down the line. Many believe that, as the god of misfortune, any paintings or writings of the Prince of Zenlun Zenli had the power of a curse. If placed on the back of a person or on the main entrance of a household, then the cursed person or household would run into all sorts of bad luck. It was hard to tell whether this was a description of a god or a ghost. Lian shook his head. He couldn't bear to read any more about himself. It was probably better to read about the other prominent gods of today, so he wouldn't be discourteous if he ran into them, and ended up not being able to tell them apart. A villager had mentioned the water master earlier, so Lian moved on to the description of the water master. The water master Wudu controls water and simultaneously wealth. Most merchants have a water master shrine in their shores and homes to guarantee their wealth. Lian thought this was strange. Why would a god of water control wealth? The youth behind the hay responded, when merchants transport goods, their cargo is mainly set on the waterways, so they always go to the water master temple and light up a tall incense to pray for a safe journey, promising this or that when they return. After a while, the water master gradually came to control wealth. The youth was actually answering his questions, especially for him. Lian turned around. Really? Interesting. The water master must be a very powerful major god then, the youth sneered. Yeah, he's the water tyrant after all. Judging by that tone, Lian didn't think the boy took that particular heavenly official all that seriously. It didn't sound like he was complimenting him either. What's the water tyrant? The youth replied leisurely. When a ship travels down a major river, it all depends on him, whether his ship can set sail. No offerings means capsizing. Pretty tyrannical. So that's how he received the nickname. Kind of like General Yu Yang and the Sleeping General. Famous gods usually had a nickname or two between all the realms. For example, Lian was known as the laughingstock of the three realms, the infamous freak, the jinx, the loser, etc. Usually, it was fairly disrespectful to use those nicknames on heavenly officials. Like if anyone were to call Mu Ying the Sleeping General, he'd surely fly into a rage. Lian made a note to himself on what not to call the water master and said, I see. Thanks so much for enlightening me. He paused briefly. And think of this youth to be rather intriguing conversationalist, he continued. My friend, you look young, but you know a lot. The youth replied, No, just bored. I read whenever I'm free, that's all. In the mortal realm, it was easy to find books on lore that spoke of the stories of gods and ghosts, the subjects ranging from their kindness and grudges to trivialities. Some were real and some were fake. It wasn't odd that the youth knew so much. Lian put down the scroll. Then, my friend, you know about gods, but do you know about ghosts too? Which ghost? The youth asked. Lian replied. Crimson Rain Sought Flower, Cheng. The youth chuckled and finally sat up when he heard that name. He turned around and Lian's eyes suddenly lit up. The youth was about 16 or 17 years old. His tunic was redder than maple leaves, and his skin was white like snow, with eyes bright as stars. He looked aghast with a smile. He was exceptionally handsome, but there was an inexplicable hint of wildness in his looks. His hair was tied in a loose ponytail, crooked and carefree. The cart was driving through the forest of flaming red maples, where maple leaves danced their way onto the ground. A leaf playfully landed on the shoulder of the youth, and he blew it off softly. Then he looked up at Lian, speaking with a shadow of a smile. What do you want to know? Ask away. He looked teasing, yet somehow possessed the perfect composure of omniscience. Though he sounded youthful, his voice was deeper than was typical for his age, and it was pleasant to the ears. Sitting upright on the cart, Lian watched him thoughtfully for a moment, then said, Crimson Rain Sought Flower evokes quite an imagery. Do you know where it came from, my friends? Let me This is the famous picture. Okay. So we're gonna about end it here, because I read about part 2 and part 1 of 2 chapters. And chapter 5 is kind of more short than I thought it was going to be. So we'll just go ahead and leave it there. So that was part 2 of chapter 5, and then part 1 of chapter 6, where we finally, I think, meet part of the man, the legend, the myth. So anyway, what do you guys think of his introduction? Did you guys think it was odd that he, was on an ox cart, just kind of seemingly waiting for Zilan to show up? Like how would he even know that he was gonna go there? And what do you think of Zilan? What do you think of his story so far? I know that he's good at collecting scraps and is trying to build a name or a temple for himself. It's just kind of cute. Hopefully he becomes successful. So just let me know down in the comments below what you think. Also, I have a very exciting news. So Jamie, who's an author, she wrote books like Hate and Me. Sorry, I can't pronounce that. But she's a very prolific writer of boys' love novels in Thailand. She's actually going to come onto the show. Now I'm asking you for your assistance. So if you guys know her and her work, if you have any questions for her, please let me know below in the comments. That way I could go ahead and ask her fan questions, so that way we can have a good conversation. That's going to be upcoming soon, so I am really excited about it. She said yes, so yay. On Fridays, I'm going to be talking about, on this Friday, I'm going to be talking about the Song of Achilles. So we're going to go into a deeper dive about that on Fridays. And then on Saturdays, it's going to be my live stream of Dream Daddy from 12 to 1 p.m. So don't miss that. Now, if you enjoy my content, if you're one of my subscribers, then please feel free to support me using any method that you feel like down below. I do have a new Patreon page where if you become my patron, you get a little shout out from me, just thanking you for doing that. And also, I have some exciting old timey mail stuff. So I would also be sending out letters to y'all, just thanking you and just providing some reading recommendations and things like that. So if you like what I do, please consider becoming my patron. You can also buy me a coffee as well. Anything that would appreciate the channel. And also, you could use any of my Amazon affiliate links to buy any novels. It's amazon.com/manareads2022. So if you use any of my affiliates, if you use that affiliate link, I also get a little portion of that. That would also be very helpful. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you look forward to my next video. Bye.